Inyanu bik wenawap darabandari. Nyariana nyanga bik ban ba nyagu. Gagukal nangit bambuth yellingbu ba gamaji. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people on whose land Darebin Council stands. I recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. It's wonderful to see so many people here for the meeting tonight. Membership of this meeting is as listed in the agenda, and we have apologies from Councillors Greco and Lawrence. Councillors, are there any disclosures of conflict of interest this evening? The CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to declare an interest in item 8.14 and also item 14.1, specifically parts 3 and 4.
Thank you for that. So that brings us to confirmation of the minutes of the council meetings. That's moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Messina. All those in favour? That motion is carried. And that brings us to question and submission time. Before we begin with question and submission time, I would like to just set out my expectations in relation to our behaviour and remind councillors of our obligations under the Councillor Code of Conduct. At Darebin, we pride ourselves on being a progressive and contemporary council. In the interests of demonstrating exemplary leadership, I have high expectations that we will all be professional in our conduct throughout the evening and respectful in our debate. It is important for both councillors and members of the community to remember that our council is both a workplace and a public space, and we have an obligation to ensure that the working environment and public forums are safe for everyone, both emotionally as well as physically. I want to be clear that I won't tolerate any form of personal acrimony or insult, grandstanding or yelling, nor will I put up with talking over the top of one another, any use of unreasonable or impolite language or interjections from the gallery. We have a huge agenda tonight, councillors, and as always I expect you to direct questions or comments that you have through me as the chair. I will endeavour to make sure that everybody has an opportunity, but also to make sure that we stick to time. In relation to question time, I'll start with questions submitted online, but before I do, I would like to remind people in the gallery that if you have a question, you are required to approach the lectern and clearly state your name. If you cannot approach the lectern, an officer will come to you. Please wait to have the microphone before you speak. That's very important for those who are watching the live stream to make sure they can hear. I ask that you direct your questions to myself as the Mayor and that you limit your questions to 2, as this gives others the opportunity to ask questions as well. Please make your questions brief and to the point. There is no need for lengthy introductory comments to preface your questions. So the first question that we have is from Jeffrey Richards. Mr. Richards, please come up to the lectern.
First chance. Mayor and councillors, my best wishes for the season. As a resident, and I'm sorry there is a little bit of preamble with this, as a resident and body corporate chair of the unit development adjacent to Story Reserve, that's where I live. I'm Jeff Richards and I live in Story Road next to Story Reserve. And I want to thank the council for their attention to recent fencing, repair issues and graffiti. There's been a lot done there, and the council has followed up and it's much appreciated. Also appreciated was the prompt action following the recent, that big Thursday storm damage. It blew out part of the fencing up there and took a bough off the tree in the reserve. My body corporate met recently at the AGM and wanted to pass on their thanks for the works council has done. But they did ask, and that's the point in being here, that every effort be made to attend or repair the remaining tree damage. It is the biggest, the oldest, the most beautiful eucalypt tree there. I'm saying that because we also understand that there is consideration being given to taking the tree out. and they're claiming that root damage might be damaging due to sewerage. Eucalypts don't get into sewerage in the main. It's not a reason at all, we don't believe. So an arborist has been commissioned, I believe, and has visited the site to look at the overall, all of the trees there. Well done. And perhaps has presented a report for the reserve. My question, will council take all steps to ensure the existing damaged tree can be saved? It's now symmetrical in shape, getting rid of the bough, fixed it up. It's done its thing. And may we obtain a copy of any related arborist report? My second question follows on and might be, you save coming back at it. It's very brief, Mayor. In the adjacent Northern Hay, opposite the pathway, is a property there, and to my amazement, the tree out the front has been cut down and gone. And it's the same property that leaves refuge bins permanently on the street. My question is, was the tree removal approved? Can a replacement be considered, and what action can be taken regarding bins left on footpaths?
Thank you for those questions.
Sorry for the long...
That's okay, I've got an answer for you. Thank you for those questions. Council endeavours to retain all trees in the municipality. Removal is only performed as a last resort and as a result of major decline in health, poor structure or damage to infrastructure that cannot be maintained by reasonable methods. This approach is in keeping with Council's tree retention policy. A council arborist has inspected the tree today and is confident the tree will survive. Some minor works may be carried out on the tree to improve its health. The arborist will make contact with you this week to discuss the outcome of the inspection. In relation to the second question, Council recently removed a pyrus tree on Northern Hay Street, which was fatally damaged in a recent storm event. Council will replace the tree in the coming planting season. Council will also investigate and write to the resident at Northern Hay Street regarding bins being left on the footpath. That is contrary to the local law.
Thank you. That was the tree, was it, that was removed?
I believe so, yes, that it was as a result of storm damage. Thank you, Mr. Richards.
Thank you very much for the replies to both.
Thank you. That's the only question that I've received on notice. I'll now invite any members of the gallery who have a question to come and ask their question. Ms O'Malley. Oh, yes, sorry, please do come up. Yes, you, yep. You, absolutely.
My name's Dave Norris. I'm Secretary of the Preston Baseball Club. If I can just give a brief, 20 years ago we were moved from Robinson Reserve to La Trobe University, and they have recently built a new $5 million facility. Now, I've had several meetings with Leisure Services and the last two mayors, including Councillor Lasserve. And at that last meeting, we had assurances from the university that we would be looked after, and we feel as though we've been sort of sold down the creek. 2 weeks ago, we were forced to sign under duress a new agreement. Basically, our problem is, for our survival, we were guaranteed, and this was made clear at that meeting, that we would be maintained with canteen facilities because that ensures our survival. And being a large club, and we've got one of the largest junior programs in the state, we've been going for over 110 years. They have now gone back on that and withdrawn the canteen facilities. They've got an outside provider. They've doubled our rent. And really, we're concerned that we're going to go out the back door. Now, like I said, we provide so many, for boys and girls, we've got a huge junior program. We were given all these assurances with Professor Hoy, who came and met with us here, and I just wondered, where do we go from here? And I'm asking you, we were hoping, because they were looking for some concessions out there, some land concessions, and now that we really are concerned that we're going to go out the back door after 110 years, and we just wonder where we're going to go from here. And like Councillor Surf said, we just throw our hands up. And we signed this agreement 2 weeks ago under duress.
Thank you for that question, Mr Norris. It does sound like a difficult situation, and I hear how difficult that is. I'll take that on notice and ask that officers follow up with you.
Sure.
And see what we can do and how we answer that question for you.
I've had a couple of meetings with Leisure Services, but...
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming tonight. Ms O'Malley.
Mayor Rennie, on the 2nd of December 2019, I asked Council to refer me to the relevant policies that determine the street tree planning regime and the soonest opportunity for the community to be consulted about amending the relevant policies. I've made this inquiry not just on my own behalf, but on behalf of several experienced environmentalists, possibly naturalists, and arborists who are concerned about the manner in which Darebin is managing street tree planting and species selection. Council's response was defensive about current practices and, most importantly, did not include any reference to the main policy on the topic, Darebin's Green Streetscape Strategy 2012 to 2020, which directly relates to the decisions made about street tree selection and planting. Clearly, this policy is on the verge of expiring and there will be a process required for community consultation. When will the community consultations for the replacement of the Green Streetscape Strategy, I hope you rename it, commence? And why was I given a misleading response to my question about the policy at the 2nd of December meeting? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Ms O'Malley. I'll just ask officers whether I take that on notice or whether anyone... So I'm going to take that on notice, noting that there are a couple of different components. And I would note that we are currently engaging closely, as I believe you would know, with the Darebin Nature Trust, and do actually also anticipate that that process will also inform future work in the area, in addition to the consultation.
I am aware that Darebin Nature Trust is being consulted, but I'm not sure that that's satisfactory enough, because there are more people in the community concerned about this than the people in Darebin Nature Trust. And not everyone who is even on Darebin Nature Trust is going to the meetings. So it's of broad concern. This is a really important issue to get the tree planting right. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No, there being none, we'll continue with the meeting. The next part of the agenda is petitions. There are none. That brings us to urgent business. There is no urgent business, so that brings us to consideration of reports. Before we go to consideration of reports, and whilst we have people in the gallery, I would like to particularly note that this is our last council meeting of the year, and to take this opportunity to wish everybody a very safe and wonderful festive season and new year, and to thank all of the staff for their extraordinary work over the year. And I felt that it was appropriate to make that announcement now rather than at the end of the meeting, because that could be quite late and I don't anticipate we'll have as many people in the gallery at that time. So, councillors, the first item is item 8.1, and before we move into asking for a motion, we have relevant staff here, and I'm actually going to ask for questions before we get to a motion if anyone has any questions on this item. No? So there appear to be no questions. I will move straight to asking if anyone has a motion. Councillor Messina.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie, I'd like to thank the officers involved with preparing
Sorry,
the
you've
report.
moved and you're moving the recommendation. I just have to get a seconder.
I'm eager for the evening to finish.
So seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Messina.
Thank you. Through you, Melanie, I'd like to endorse the officers' report and the progress report. And when we came together 3 years ago, we set our council plan, and back on there we set 16 big action plans, and that's what I look forward to see the progress of that particular project, the progress of those particular projects. In addition to that, this particular report also has 180 actions from our initial council plan and where they stand currently so that we can match the progress. And when I look at that, I also look at the first point, and what I'm really proud of, is the age-friendly Darebin recommendations, where we accepted most of the 98 recommendations. I also look forward to reading that we've planted approximately 400 trees since September 2019. And also, I look forward to reading the progress of the Preston precinct. We have had some challenges, and some of those challenges involve the railway crossing and removal at Preston, which is holding up to see what that vision's going to look like. But I'm pleased to say that our advocacy work with the reservoir elevated rail and today's opening of that particular rail, I don't know if anybody's driven through the precinct, and it looks quite vibrant. And I actually got a video that I haven't posted yet coming through the railway station. So the advocacy works there that have been attended to by the officers has been exceptional. So I just want to thank the officers for that proactive measures. And of course finances, but I'm not going to divulge into finances. I'll wait and see if Councillor McCarthy wants to talk about the finances.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor McCarthy.
I love it when I'm speaking about something which I wasn't going to speak about, but I will speak about. Before I get to the finances, I just wanted to highlight a couple of the key achievements in this period, and one, of course, was the resolution by council to accept most of the 98 age-friendly Darebin recommendations, which I think is a significant piece of work in this council term. In fact, it's a work that has had far-reaching impact. I was in another area in Mount Alexander Shire on the weekend, and someone approached me, a woman who'd been involved in a similar project elsewhere, and said, "How did you do that piece of work?" So, because they wish they'd done it the way that we did it. So it's really heartening to hear that from someone outside of our area, seeing the value of that. I just wanted to just also note that there are so many achievements in this quarterly report, some really significant numbers there, one of which, of course, is the 400 trees that have been planted in streetscapes. And I would just note the question earlier, that work continues, but the policy obviously needs some serious work as well, given what's happening not only in Darebin but around the world. In relation to the finances, I would just note that as of the 30th of September 2019, Council showed a cash and investment balance of 84.10 million, which is 25.56 million ahead of budget. So that's a positive result, obviously, for the quarter, but obviously that money is there to be spent. In terms of Council's current net asset position, it currently sits at 161,000.49 million, which is 19.41 million more than budget. So Council is in a positive financial position, and that's obviously something that we take great responsibility over. I just would also note, and I just would also thank the officers for all their work in the last quarter. There's been a huge amount of project activity as well as capital works, and some great achievements in the quarterly report, which I'm sure councillors will celebrate.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. I will now move to item 8.2, endorsement of the Equity, Inclusion and Human Rights Framework. Councillor Williams has indicated she's happy to move that, and Councillor Amir is happy to second it. Are there any questions before we begin the debate? No? So, Councillor Williams, over to you.
Thank you. The Equity, Inclusion and Human Rights Framework actually connects to all of Council's business policy and action plans. It actually will advance a key target of what our Council plan is all about. It is to develop and implement strategies and programs that build on social cohesion. It will also be the purpose of Equity, Inclusion and Human Rights Framework. It will guide Council to addressing those gaps and barriers that we might be experiencing. Important parts of it is that recognising Australia's First People, upholding human rights and social justice, and being equitable and inclusive, especially on other matters such as climate justice and action to combat climate change. We will also be looking at, looking at addressing other issues such as social justice and being more meaningful in our areas. So we'll also, in reference to this framework, we actually went out to the community and we had, my paperwork. Sorry. Go back. Oh my goodness. We went to online and we went to our Have Your Say. We also went out to the community where there was community participation and also feedback from our community. I've lost those numbers, what they are. We also, 85. No, there's another section. Oh yeah, so it's 82 on ours. Sorry. So we had Your Say. We also went to organisations such as the Diversity Council of Australia, the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission, the Darebin Aboriginal Advisory, the Sexuality, Sex and Gender Diversity Committees, the Active Health and Ageing Board, and we also got we also peered the review from the provider of Whittlesea Council and Moreland Council. So a lot of work has gone into this particular framework, and it's really important because it does connect to all of our other policies that we do have here and Council. So it's important that we continue to go forward and that we actually do more, especially for those where we see that there's little gaps here and there. We don't feel there's anything major happening in Council, or else we would have addressed those issues, but this actually just tightens it so we can go forward.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Amir.
That was horrible.
Thanks very much, Mayor Rennie. So what we have here is a very holistic approach to equity and inclusion in the City of Darebin, and I mean that in a few ways. So when I read through this, it's very clear there's a focus on intersectionality and recognising the multidimensional experience of all of our lives, or everyone who lives, works, plays, visits in Darebin, and understanding that all of us have a gender, a level of ability, a socioeconomic background, and all of these interplay to our experience of service delivery and walking down the street and how we engage with other people in Darebin. The plan is also holistic in going across all areas of council and in having a high-level vision together with the on-ground practice. And particularly, it's really good to see the implementation of the equity impact assessment, which means that it's not just going to be around making those big advocacy statements, but actually looking at every component of council, every new project, and thinking about how inclusive it is and how we can make it more inclusive across a whole range of factors. It also focuses on the big issues that impact on a social level: climate, housing, poverty, health, that have such profound impacts on people's day-to-day lives. There's work around here in terms of the internal workings of council, service delivery and advocacy to state and federal government. And one thing I'm excited about with this is that I can immediately think of examples where we can be modelling good practice. One is around, for example, gender equity here inside the organisation, or some inclusive design principles that we're implementing in our spaces to make people feel welcome, that will then have flow-on effects in the way that, for example, the women in this organisation feel and lead when they go into future roles, people in the community feeling safe, making those connections and encouraging others to feel safe and included and welcome as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you to the staff for all the work on that. That brings us to 8.3, the Child and Youth Engagement Project.
Councillor Amir.
Councillor Amir to move, Councillor McCarthy to second, and before we enter the debate, does anyone have any questions of the officers? No? So Councillor Amir, over to you.
So what we have here is a proposal for a child and youth engagement project. This comes out of the budget that we had for 2019-20, which included funding for an engagement program. And there's three options presented here in the report. The suggested proposal, which I'm happy to support, is for a middle years summit, focusing on the needs and aspirations of children aged 8 to 12. And this group was particularly focused on because it's a group that's too old to benefit from the early years work that we do, and too young for some of the youth-focused activities that start at age 12. And anyone who has a child aged 8 to 12 or has worked with children aged 8 to 12 know what a great age this is. In my former life, I worked in out-of-school care and holiday programs with primary school kids, and I just love that age where kids are full of energy, they're full of ideas, they're have a real passion for life and are not yet weighed down by some of the challenges that can plague us when we reach adulthood. This has also been informed by the work of the Young Citizens Jury, so I wanted to say thank you to them and, of course, to the Youth Services team for the work that they've done in the policy and planning, as well as, of course, the service delivery. The proposed summit will be co-designed with children and child-led, so it has, I guess, layers of benefit around providing leadership opportunities to these children in late primary school, early secondary school, that can hopefully make them feel like council is for them too. And I think one thing I think about often is that people who are under 18 or even young people who aren't able to own homes can often feel like their council doesn't really belong to them, that it's something for people who are lucky enough to be able to own property and be paying rates. So I'm really excited that we can have a project that is saying this is just for you, that those voices are important. And I think that because of, I know from talking to young people in Darebin of that age group that they have so many ideas and their passions are very much at the global level, often around wanting to make the world a better place and looking for the way that they can make a positive difference. So I'm glad that we will have this platform to be able to hear those voices, encourage those children to learn those skills that will set them up hopefully in a good position to be the strong leaders for the future that we're absolutely going to need in the coming decades. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I feel like I had a fantastic bit of research for this exact item this afternoon when I attended my own daughter, who's 10 years old, recently turned 10, her school inquiry showcase, where all the grade 4s had to undertake an inquiry project and explore something that meant something to them or something that they wanted to make a difference around. And lo and behold, and as this report clearly outlines, our young citizens in this 8 to 12 age group, of which my daughter is right in the middle, have a global awareness that is well beyond what I think young people when I was in that age group actually have. And that may be obviously to do with the increased contact with media, it may be in fact the education system, it may be their parents, or it may be the global movements. There are a whole lot of factors that influence these young people, but these young people are also, I should say young people, they are children under the legal sense, but they have the same level of civic responsibility, many of them, as what we typically would describe as young people. And this is why there's an interesting thing that we have here in Darebin, which is that we don't currently have a mechanism through which to find out what is important to this group. The group of 8 to 12-year-olds actually comprises around 7,000 people in Darebin. So around 7,000 people who are not in the early years and are not adolescents. They're in that difficult period in the middle where, as Councillor Amir rightly pointed out, you have an openness to the world and an interest in what's going on around you and in your community, but you may not necessarily have much power. You may not necessarily have much direct influence. You may not necessarily have a way or a means through which to have your voice heard. And that voice may not be on the big global issues or even the national issues or even the local issues. It may be in the little things in life that would actually make your experience and those of you around you much easier. And I would just draw to Council's attention that this is also the age group where resilience of children can actually be incredibly
10
high,
seconds.
but can also drop as we transition to secondary school. So what we do with this group of children is absolutely
Thank you,
critical
that's time.
to the whole community.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to item 8.4 on the agenda, the Intercultural Centre Feasibility Study Community Consultation. I've got a mover with Councillor Newton and seconded by Councillor Messina. Before we begin the debate, I'll just check if anyone has any questions. Fantastic. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So tonight we're looking at the consultation that was done on the Intercultural Centre review. So I'm very happy to support this proposal because what it means is that we're going to be endorsing that we move the Intercultural Centre from around the corner to just under here. And the reason that I'm excited about it is because, as we know from the report, it has been challenging for the last couple of years, particularly with VCAT being in the same space as where the Intercultural Centre is located now. And I've spent a lot of time in the Intercultural Centre and I love it, and I think the people that are there love it. But going through this consultation and moving it to where it will be next is just going to lift it so much. And I really like that the report and the consultation talks about that, you know, a building like this can be really intimidating for people that might be newly arrived or might not see government as something that is a safe space for them in their home countries. And I think that's been considered, which is fantastic. And it's just one of these projects where when we think about things long-term at council, you know, we get the plans, we see everything, we hear about the consultation, and then it's something over the next couple of years where we get to see it come to life. And I'm just so excited about that. I think the consultation was fantastic. I'm imagining something a little bit like a Wheeler Centre where there's contestation, difference of ideas shared, but in a very respectful space. And I'd like to think that's similar to what we have here in the chamber. So really looking forward to seeing how this goes over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Messina.
Thank you. A lot of work has been undertaken to produce this particular report and also going through the consultation period. But I wanted to point out that it is always my belief that multiculturalism is Australia's greatest asset, and interculturalism is another layer of that multiculturalism. And if you don't know who your residents are, if we go back to the report that was produced beforehand, then how do we know what we need to do to shape this particular municipality? And I think that's another layer where if we have a look at some of the facts and figures of our own municipality, we've got 33% of our municipality that were born overseas, 7% of our population have difficulty speaking English, and I think I'm doing that right now. And 2,000 are international students that live and reside in Darebin, and different faiths and beliefs, obviously. And that this particular area, I think, if we have a look at it, it's nice and clean, the facade of the building at the moment. And I notice there's a tree and there's some beautiful reindeers, and I actually don't think it'll be intimidating. I think it'll be warm and inviting, and the environment is what sets the scene. Where it was situated before with VCAT was not a friendly environment, and I think it actually deterred people from moving in. I think this is a great step forward, and I think the process with the consultation is a positive as well, and I think this is where Darebin needs to be, and I want to thank the officers that have helped bringing that to the forefront, and the community told us what they wanted. So they've come along on the journey, so thank you to Vicky and the team that put this together, so I'm happy to endorse it.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to item 8.5, the Social and Sustainable Procurement Policy. Councillor McCarthy has indicated he will move that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lasserf, thank you. Before we begin the debate, are there any questions of the officers? No? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to start off by thanking our officers for the extraordinary amount of work that's gone into getting this right, and also the recognition that this is a very courageous and ambitious policy, which is the truth of which is going to be borne out in the implementation. So here in the chamber, if we adopt this evening, we are setting the benchmark upon which we expect council to treat its procurement decisions, but it's our good people here and other people in the organisation that will deal with the reality of that. And I say that, and I name that because this policy, this procurement policy is challenging. It's actually challenging us as an organisation, and it's challenging everyone that we do business with to do better. And to do better on a number of fronts. I won't go through them all, they are in the report. They touch on the social and sustainable goals of council. So one in particular is of course council's goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2020, which it turns out is only 3 weeks away. So we better get our skates on. So we're getting the policy in place. The policy will drive the decision-making and the evaluation processes in relation to all of council's procurement decisions. When we spend money, we know that it has a flow-on impact into the community, but it can also have a positive flow impact into council's own policy aspirations. One of those which we set in 2017 as part of, at the same time as we established the Youth Citizens Jury, was to identify the need for a youth employment dividend. And I'm really pleased to say that this policy delivers the practical way to implement that. So for any procurement decision by council of $150,000 or more, 10% of the work associated with that decision will have a youth employment or youth engagement or youth training outcome. And that means that for some businesses, and this is in fact a gateway, this is a hurdle. So this is not an optional extra. This is not part of the evaluation process. This is one of the things you have to step through to do business with Darebin. And if you can't, and you're not in a position to provide 10% of the work in the contract to people between the ages of 15 and 25, who we know are structurally disadvantaged in the employment market. They're structurally disadvantaged from entry-level employment, and yet they deserve a fantastic pathway into not only the work of council, but also council suppliers. Then you need to work with council to identify how you might do something that is of equivalent value. And so that may in fact be supporting your existing staff to be involved in employment mentoring. It might be engaging with council in some other way, but certainly that youth employment dividend has to be there. And I believe this makes us the first council in Australia to have that policy in place. And I suspect, and given that we'll be reviewing this in 6 months, many others will follow. So this is groundbreaking work. It is challenging. I suspect that there'll be some difficult conversations with some of our contractors and suppliers, but they're the conversations we need to have. I'll end it there and thank the officers again for their work.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lasserf.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I guess the one point, I think Councillor McCarthy has summed it up quite well, but the one point I wanted to make is that we do a lot of work already in terms of what we can do to improve social inclusion, social justice within our organisation and the environmental impact of our operations. And it's easy to do that when you have control, direct control over decisions. So when we can change lights to save money, we do that. Where the next wave of action, particularly around social and sustainability, needs to lie is knowing where every single dollar of our money is spent and the impact it will be having. And I think that this procurement policy allows us to do that, not only to understand it, but to start to manage it and to start reduce the impacts or have greater social benefits for our community. So that's, I guess, I'm really pleased with where this procurement policy has landed. The officers have worked exceptionally hard, taking on a lot of our feedback, and I'm grateful for that. And so I'm really happy to be supporting this tonight. The only other point that I wanted to make, and that would be really important after we adopt this and we get to work at implementing it, is making sure that we work with as many other local councils to encourage them to adopt similar policies, because it's only when there are collective asks to suppliers, to contractors, that they will actually change their behaviour, not just for us, but for everyone, and that will have a flow-on impact as well.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to item 8.6, the Climate Emergency Darebin Advisory Committee Terms of Reference.
So moved, but with just a couple of additional words to, they appear there on point 3. So,
okay, so Councillor McCarthy has moved a motion.
The words are not quite correct, sorry. So it should be adopts the revised terms of reference for the Climate Emergency Darebin Advisory Committee, and then it should just say, noting that these terms of reference will be reviewed by council in the next term. So deleting clause 5.2, vacation of office shouldn't be there. That's correct now.
Great. Thank you, Councillor McCarthy, for that clarification. That's seconded by Councillor Lasserf. Before we begin debate, are there any questions of the officers? No? So, Councillor McCarthy, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you also officers and also members of Climate Emergency Darebin for their input into this report. This report adopts the new terms of reference for council, for Climate Emergency Darebin, which of course is a body established in this term of council to help drive council's work in response to the climate emergency. It is an unusual body in the sense that it is a community advisory committee, that is the structure, and we're proposing that we continue with that structure based on the advice of both the members have said and also officer investigation into potential models. And you can see there in the report and also in the appendices the reasoning for continuing with this structure into the future. But what this does is actually consolidates some of that work and says what the focus of Climate Emergency Darebin is going forward, how it aligns closely and deeply with the work that Council is doing in terms of the mobilisation and solutions development around climate emergency response here in Darebin. And of course the report also summarises the work that Council is doing right now to build an alliance of local councils, which is called Climate Emergency Australia. And that's because we recognise that external network, that advocacy work that we need to be doing with the 75 plus councils and the Australian Capital Territory Government in partnership is absolutely critical, but that has a separate focus. So Darebin cannot just on its own continue to be holding that particular role. We need to be sharing that and actually building that network externally. And so Climate Emergency Darebin's focus becomes much clearer going forward. In relation to what the report proposes, it proposes a model for Climate Emergency Darebin with a 4-year appointment period. Obviously, we cannot appoint people for a 4-year term in the current setting because we are in the final year of a council term. So this sets up a model going forward, but of course that's up to the next council to have a look at as well. And given the time frame, we need to make sure we've got a mechanism to be able to put people on, if we need to, onto this committee in any time in the next 12 months. So that it delivers all those and so many more. It is timely, though, that we are dealing with this report right now because if councillors would be aware, for the past week and a bit, we've had the International Climate Summit in Madrid occurring, and I have to say, despite the wonderful speeches that were given, the International Climate Emergency Forum that was held overnight, overall, the results of that summit, that conference, are a staggering disappointment. And so it once again falls to local governments a lot around the world, and particularly here in places like Darebin, to maintain that pressure to not only do the work that we need to do in-house, but also to be talking about what other levels of government need to do. And Climate Emergency Darebin has been critical in helping build that base. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lasserf.
I don't have much to add, just to say that I'd like to thank the Climate Emergency Darebin members who have been working tirelessly, not just over the last couple of years with us, but for a very long time campaigning for this issue. I think it's really important that we continue to have some sort of group working with us on the climate emergency and shaping what the climate emergency plan and agenda looks like for the city of Darebin, because there is just such a wealth of knowledge within our local community around this issue, and we need their help. We need everyone to be working on this issue if we're actually going to see results. So I just wanted to reiterate the thanks to them, and I'm looking forward to working with the advisory committee.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously also. That brings us to item 8.7, Draft Waste and Recycling Strategy, moved by Councillor Messina, seconded Councillor Amir. Thank you. Before we enter the debate, I'll just ask if anyone has any questions for the officers. No? So, Councillor Messina, over to you.
I'm delighted and very excited and so proud of this council and the officers and our drive and our commitment in the area of waste and recycling. The community members that I've met, members from the community, members from other councils, officers from other councils, councillors from other municipalities, look upon Darebin and our movement in that area. And I'm I just can't thank the officers, Rachel, Sally and the team. I'm so proud to endorse this recycling strategy for community consultation. But I also want to point out the work undertaken by the marketing team. Anna and your team, can I just say that I don't think I ever get so much feedback on LinkedIn with everything that I share about what we're doing. And I recall there was a lot of traction from Sammy G and the demystifying of the waste, curbside recycling, and the feedback I received that. So I want to say thank you to the team in both departments for putting that together. That was just pleasure to see. The message was quite clear, and I think that's important. If we need to change the waste and the perception of waste, we need to educate and bring the community on the journey. This particular draft waste and recycling strategy, the direction encompasses many areas where the state and federal platforms should be proactive in. But what do we know? We do know that Australia is far behind the rest of the world when it comes to waste and recycling. And we know that we're in the middle of a waste crisis. And why is that? Melbourne's population is expected to increase by 6.3 million people by 2031. And where is that waste going to go? So we need to think about that. So what can council do? The first step is that we need to challenge the traditional approach of basic curbside waste. We now look beyond an item being rejected into the bin and collected for landfill. We need the residents to come along that journey, and what we need to collectively look through the lens of innovation, avoidance, reuse. One is that is underpinned by psychology, education and community engagement. This strategy focuses on food waste, textile and curbside recycling. And how will we do that? Will we implement trial anaerobic digesters for local traders by 2021, which is an area that we need to look at, because we do focus on residential waste, but we also need to focus on commercial, industrial and retail waste as well. And introducing a planning condition on new developments for green waste service, developing textile drop-offs and avoidance promotion, undertake bin audits, trial business green waste collection, launch the Pitch It waste strategy,
10 seconds.
Continue to educate the community on demystifying curbside waste, advocate and lead the way, asking the community to come on the journey with us. I'm smiling and I look forward to the Have Your Say feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Amir.
It's exciting talking about waste. Before I came on council, it's not something I was so excited about, but now as a councillor, I can see that this is a really big priority issue for the community. The challenge in that is the context that we're within, and in the last year we've seen the recycling crisis, the challenges around the China sword policy, the inaction by the state government, all of which has been really frustrating. And difficult. But the good side is that the community has shown very strongly that they care about reducing waste. They're diligent and they're interested, and it's been really exciting to see the recent implementation of the food waste collection. I have one colleague in another role that I work in when she said to me the other day, "Steph, every time I look at you, I think of food waste." I thought, that is a win. So I'm excited that that's now a high profile thing for this council, the success of that. Of course, winning that last contract with Visy. And now we're moving on to this new stage, the strategic stage that we've been able to plan for over the last couple of years. So again, echoing the thanks to the team for that hard work. I came onto council wanting to make big changes in this space, but not having the technical detail. And it's been really great to now have that technical detail to be able to see the numbers of where can we make the most difference, and seeing that's in food waste, seeing that's in textile recycling. We know that we can work with businesses and work with residents as well. It was really interesting seeing the biochar facility in Manningham, and now good to also see that actually for what we need, biodigestion is focused for now. So thank you for the hard work. I'm looking forward to seeing all this being implemented and to continue to reduce our waste going to landfill.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to start off by saying it's one of those things occasionally that councillors can come into a council meeting and say this is a rubbish policy and mean a negative thing. But in this case, this is actually completely changing what we think about rubbish. And I say that because it was only over the weekend that Darebin Council, along with a bunch of other councils, was in the Murdoch press for overstepping our boundaries once again in relation to becoming involved in things that are beyond rates, roads and rubbish. Well, we've seen that we've set a policy, which of course is one of the defining policies of this term of council, being the climate emergency policy, which has impacted on all three. And in this case has impacted significantly on how we think about what we are doing with our rubbish, with our waste, and not just our waste, but in fact the waste of others. So we look at the road resurfacing program that is using recycled tyres. Here we are actually solving a problem for the EPA and the state government around the stockpiling of tyres, and we're also doing something positive in terms of our own road resurfacing. I'd also note that we've thrown a further R into that 3 Rs of local government, which in this case, and I will name it, is actually revolution. And as councillors would note here, we on page 2 of the report, it refers to us promoting the compost revolution to our community. These are well-named programs, well-named activities, but they are literally revolutions in the sense that we are completely trying to change the way that we think about the products that we use, that we consume, that we create, and that there is leftover material. I would also just note in closing that I don't think there's any coincidence. Councillor Messina, who's been a great champion of this work, both here in this chamber and also in the sector more generally, and has won accolades for her advocacy on this, made reference to Sammy J's video that he appeared in, and it was only 2 days later after the launch of that video that Sammy J was actually appointed as the morning's host on ABC Melbourne. So complete coincidence, not.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to item 8.8, intention to declare a special charge. Moved by Councillor Lasserve, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Are there any questions for the officers?
We just need to fill in some bits in the motion. Do you want me to read them out?
That would be great, thank you.
I don't know what number it is because it's different.
0.9.
It's 0.9, sorry. Because it's 0.1 in
0.9.
this. It's over the page, yep.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Sorry. I'm just going to read out the blanks, if that's okay. Is everyone okay with that? Okay. So the first one is $5,830,000, including GST, to the Environment Shop Pty Ltd as the trustee for Environment Futures Trust, trading as Enviro Group. Oh, we're not going to write out the whole thing?
Perhaps we could...
That's not the name. I guess I'm just being pedantic because this is the entity we're going to a contract with. So do we need to have the words?
Can I suggest that we will get an officer to work to get the correct words on that I understand that you have identified the words in the report. If you could say the amount at 10.
Yep.
So Ms McAdam, if you could make sure that they get those words right, we might start debate, and
Yep,
before we
great.
vote, we'll come back to what's written on the screen.
Okay.
The CEO is indicating that. Okay. Now, I've had some advice that we might just defer this while we're getting the words. We'll move to item 8.9 and come back to 8.8. So we might need a quick motion to reorder. So Councillor McCarthy has moved a motion to reorder and hear 8.9 before 8.8, seconded by Councillor Williams. All those in favour? Okay, thank you, councillors. So we'll move to 8.9, adoption of the integrated weed management strategy. Thank you. That's moved by Councillor.
I'd like to move a slightly different motion to what was in the agenda.
Happy to second it.
Okay, we'll just make sure that everyone has a copy of that in front of them.
No, that'll have to be on the screen too.
So it would appear that we'll need to get that on screen as well, so we might... So are we able to get 8.9 on screen? Yes. So Councillor Amir has confirmed that the motion on screen is the one that she wishes to move. Councillor Williams, can I just draw your attention to the screen? That's the one you wish to second? Okay. Are there any questions for the officers? Yeah, Councillor McCarthy has a question.
Yeah, just a quick question, if I may. If we could just get some information from the officers about how we are going to promote the new provisions under the strategy, particularly the option for residents to identify their streets to not have glyphosate sprayed. So what is the mechanism through which? How will we communicate that? How will we make sure that every Darebin resident is aware of that opportunity?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, it was intended that happen next year, but we haven't actually developed a communications plan for that yet. We will do that pretty immediately.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Tierney. Are there any other questions? No. So Councillor Amir, over to you.
Thank you. So what we have here is the adoption of the weed management strategy that includes the integration of the consultation findings, with the consultation happening over the last couple of months. So I wanted to say outright that weed management is a really challenging area. Even you get to the definition of a weed, which is basically a plant in the wrong place. And if you look at the list of weeds, which cause some of the biggest problems here in Darebin, there's a lot of stuff in there that we often plant on purpose. So particularly the lawns that people have in their backyards and sports grounds, some herbs and vegetables people plant in their gardens, like parsley and celery. So it is it's very good to see that we have a strategy that responds to that complexity, that responds to the nuance, and also takes an approach around prevention is better than a cure, looking at some of the things that cause widespread infestation and trying to stop that before it happens. Now, we know from talking to residents in the community that lots of people really feel strongly about weeds. They feel that it looks messy, can get in the way, particularly around drains and railway lines. It can be a challenge, people playing sport, causing uneven surfaces. And of course, from a conservation and biodiversity perspective, it can be that weeds can cause a major problem in terms of displacing displacing native species. That said, there's still some people who like weeds. We have people in our community who forage weeds as a food source. My 2-year-old daughter enjoys finding dandelions that she can blow the little bits into the air. So again, emphasising it is a complex situation. We've had a strong response from some community members around reducing use of Roundup, which is why what we have here is a motion that emphasises what we will be doing to be reducing glyphosate use in Darebin, immediate cessation and control of fence lines and edges. I'm really keen to see numerical targets for the reduction of Roundup use, and I understand we don't have all of that information available at the moment to make a good decision on those targets, which is why we've got part B of the motion, enter into an agreement with Deakin University to undertake a study which will give us the information we need around what else is going to work, and then we can have those targets for the community so they can see exactly how we're tracking. And I think that's important because there has been such a big reduction in the last few years, a lot of excellent work happening and alternative methods like hand weeding, steam weeding, using weed mats and mulch and ecological burns informed by traditional practices. And I'm really keen to see the communication that Councillor McCarthy mentioned to make sure the community knows how much good work is already happening. There's lots more to do. I'd like a goat. I'm a fan of that. And thank you for support.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Williams.
Councillor Amir seems to have summed up very well. I'll just elaborate just a couple of things that the main part of this action, we do come down to 6 broad principles, and those is actually preventing and emerging weeds to other areas, to minimise that impact, and also to go to minimise those weeding spreading to other areas which are going into other municipalities also. The plan is also to monitor and report, so where these weeds are, so we can try and control them, and appropriate use of the technology that we could use that would be more effective and efficiency for those safety reasons later down the track. And also the most important thing is to obviously lower the herbicide for the future, and if not, maybe in the very near future, that we can go to a much, much safer way. The main reason why we have to use obviously strong chemicals, we have a major area of Darebin that we have to look after, whether it's parklands, bushland, conservation parks, or even the creeks. It'd be nice and easy to say that there's an easy way of going around this and trying to do a user-friendly, healthy solution, but at this point in time, there is no such thing. So hopefully in the future, we look forward to going forward that we can successfully do this in a more manageable way that'll be safe for not only humans, but for the nearby plants.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers?
I know we're trying to get through everything, Mayor, but I'm just going to say one thing.
Not at all, Councillor McCarthy. There is always time for debate.
I just think it's worth noting, and councillors would be aware of this, but not everyone necessarily would be, that the adoption of this piece of work actually coincides with the appointment of Council's first biodiversity officer, and obviously the commencement of that biodiversity planning work that follows the development of the Darebin Natural Heritage Study in 2015 and earlier pieces of work dating back over the previous decade. I say that because when you go through this report, you see the echoes of those other documents in this, not just because there's some overlap in authorship, but also because these things are part of the same piece of work, that our biodiversity is threatened by invasive weed species. And in fact, there are figures in the Practical Ecology report which refer to those previous studies which identified what percentage of our existing native flora in fact was under threat. I suspect that as we look at the current settings, the action and in some cases inaction, because this is not just about Darebin's work, it's also about other organisations that are land managers, and I'd name in particular Metro and VicTrack and also Melbourne Water also have a role to play in this. So whilst we may do everything within our power to manage and reduce the prevalence of weeds in our natural environment, we also need to advocate and where we can partner with those other agencies who also manage significant tracts of land. And also I'd name also the Department of Education and other government departments that also hold land in this area. We all have a role to play, but we've got a strategy here which sets some very clear expectations. And I would also say, and I made the point before about how we communicate what this policy means, because we know that our residents are increasingly aware of the international conversation about Roundup. It has different settings in different places.
That's time, thank you.
But we need to make sure people know that they can actually opt out of it.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Councillors, will now return to item 8.8. Councillor Le Cerf was just filling in the details for the contract award. Councillor
Okay.
Le Cerf, I think we've probably got the words, if you could check.
Okay, so $5,830,000 to the Environment Shop Pty Ltd as the trustee for the Environment Futures Trust Trading as Enviro Group, yes, that's right. Approves a contingency of $1.1 million. You're shaking your head?
No, sorry. I was, but yeah.
Not to me, okay. And was there another blank in the thing?
9, 10, 11.
I don't know where the blanks were, that's all. Sorry. Oh, sorry. So 10, approves the contingency, and then awards, so 11, awards that second contract to Solar Grain PV Pty Ltd. And there's no cost associated with that one.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, is there a seconder? I think Councillor McCarthy might have indicated he would second. Are there any questions of the officers before we begin debate? No, so Councillor Le Cerf, over to you.
Okay, so this motion not only seeks to declare a special charge for another batch of solar savers on non-residential properties, which is really great. It also seeks to broaden the size of the solar systems that are available under the program, and it also awards a contract for the next residential stream. As we all know, this program is one of our flagship programs under the Climate Emergency Plan and will support us reaching our goal of doubling solar in Darebin. To date, there have been 1,370 households and 21 business and cultural organisations who have taken us up on this offer and installed solar on their rooftops, which is amazing. This round of solar savers will add another 16 organisations, installing collectively 415 kilowatt hours. In relation to adjusting the solar system sizes that are available to non-residential properties, currently it's set at available for sizes between 10 and 30 kilowatt hours. And what officers are finding is that businesses either don't have enough roof space for 10 kilowatt hours, or they have lots of roof space and fit way more than 30 kilowatt hours on their rooftops. And so I'm really supportive of extending the program to solar system sizes between 2 and 99 kilowatts. In terms of the awarding of the contract, the normal procurement processes have been followed to appoint these two suppliers to continue. They have participated in the program previously and continue to supply our households and businesses with solar panels on their roofs, and it's really great that they can continue to help us on the solar journey.
Thank you, Councillor Le Cerf. Councillor McCarthy.
Councillor Le Cerf has covered it really well. I just would draw councillors' attention to page 52, which actually gives a bigger picture on council's work in this space and the actual number of systems and kilowatt hours that has been delivered under Solar Savers since it commenced in 2014. And at that stage, it was a pilot program of 300 households and looking at systems of a much smaller residential level. We are now talking about, obviously, commercial systems covering up to 99 kilowatts. So the growth of the program in terms of the number of installations, and in this case, that figure there of total systems being 1,565 as part of that broader aspiration of 4,000 households or businesses or buildings being covered with solar under this program. But in fact, the total kilowatts being 6,210. These are enormous numbers, and it is a fantastic program that continues to have that social justice edge at its forefront, but is also delivering benefits, in this case, for some of our businesses who, in many cases, have limited opportunity to, unless they engage in a program like this, to actually be able to offset some of those power prices that they are facing. And when businesses can reduce their energy costs and their running costs, that gives them the opportunity to look at other things like employing more people. So this has a flow-on effect to the health of a business, not just the health in terms of access to solar and action on the climate emergency.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Councillors, we've already done 8.9, so we're now at item 8.10, which is the 2020-21 Annual Grants Program. Councillor Newton moved that and seconded by Councillor Amir. Before we begin debate, are there any questions of the officers? No? Councillor Newton, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I'm very happy to be supporting the officer's recommendation for the 2020-21 Annual Grants Program. So this is a way that we can really provide support to our community for the things that they want to do, and I'm always amazed at how far they go with the money that's allocated. What we did find with the grants last year is that medium grants particularly were quite oversubscribed. So what that means is for this year we've slightly moved around how much we give to medium grants, which I think is a really good move, so more people can be funded. And the other thing that I'm very excited about for the next year is that we are going to have the Fuse Festival starting in March and also later in the year too. So what was previously, I think, event grants is now going to be Fuse Festival grants that have a total pool of $50,000, which will really allow that to hit the ground running. We've also got youth project grants, leisure, minor works and sports, etc. So very exciting to see this going ahead, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what's awarded with grants.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Amir.
Thank you. And I just wanted to second the comments made by Councillor Newton that we have so many people in Darebin who work for community organisations, volunteer. We have artists who work so hard and can do so much with these small and medium grants. There's a breadth of different grants available, which is good for meeting different needs. Particularly, I'm glad to see the quick response grants. Sometimes we get feedback around the nature of the way that community organisations or informal groups can work, and that the process of having to go through the application either is too challenging because of the context, or the timing doesn't work out for the project that people want to do. So I'm glad that we'll be able to be more responsive for some of those groups. Also very excited to see what will happen with the Fuse Festival grants and to see the Fuse Festival come to life next year, and of course supporting young people through the youth project grants. We've got an increase in-kind venue hire, which again is something very happy to see in response to speaking to some community arts organisations about the need for spaces, and also this represents a shift towards the way that we want to be using our council spaces, away from perhaps some corporate uses towards making it our spaces really for people and community, and getting maximum usage to have programming happening throughout the day and night across the city all year round, making maximum use of that. As was mentioned by Councillor Newton, last year the medium grants were heavily oversubscribed, so we've got a redistribution happening this year which will hopefully make these grants more accessible with the values that are needed. And again, thanks very much to the team for your work on this, and I'm excited to see what the community will do with these grants. Thanks.
Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to item 8.11, Streets for People, moved by Councillor Williams and seconded by Councillor Lasserf. Before we begin debate once again, I'll just ask if anyone has any questions for the officers. No, there are no questions, so Councillor Williams, over to you.
Thank you. The Streets for People Croxton West Place Making Project was to identify opportunities to assist vulnerable road users to move around easily and more comfortably, to convert some roads into don't know what's going on today. I think we're all in a hurry to try and finish the meeting. To convert and share streets to provide a safe environment for walkers and cyclists. They can easily access their local parks, schools and shops. The feasibility study identifies new connections that didn't exist before, which changes and opens access for people. It also identifies road safety concerns like vehicle speeds and volumes and preferred access. The Croxton West area includes Woolhouse and Lencester Grove corridor, as well as Beavers Road corridor, which have been identified as 2 out of 9 streets for people corridors. The Beavers Road Bridge that crosses over the Merry Creek, opening a new connection between Darebin and Moreland residents. In the 3 weeks of community engagement with our community from September to October 2019, I'd like to say a big thank you to all those residents and officers that have put this together. We've had over 700 people that have actually gone online to Your Say on our website. We've had 323 people that have actually gone online to the interactive map and had a look at the map. And we've had 1,600 mail outs. We've had 86 participants via the workshop session, and we've had communication feedback through community reference groups, and we've also done an advertisement in local newspapers and a few other places. So I'd like to say a big thank you and welcome, because I think this is a wonderful initiative, and particularly for making our streets much safer for our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Lasserf.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'm really excited about this. I'm really excited about all the Streets for People projects, but this one's also exciting for a number of reasons. This particular corridor is notorious for rat running, going north-south and to avoiding that turn onto St George's Road. And so I really do hope, obviously that causes a lot of angst for residents who live in that area. So I'm hoping that a lot of the design work that has been put into this concept design will help to alleviate some of that pressure. I think the other thing to remark about this area is it is a changing area. There are a lot of single dwellings within the area, but along the edges is changing and growing as well in terms of development. So there are going to be more people, and there's also the industrial area to the southwest that is changing as well. And in future years, we'll probably the industrial area will no longer be there, and will be full of people there as well. So I think it's a really important time to be doing a project like this, to be transforming these streets so that they are safe for the people who currently live there but will live there in the future years. I also think it's a pretty bold plan, because right smack bang in the middle of it is being proposed to close the road and put a pocket park in. And so I'm really interested to hear from the community. They've already told us what the pressures are within that area, but I'm really interested to hear how the community will respond to not only that proposal, but many of the other proposals that will, in my opinion, improve the walkability and the livability of the streets. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to note that there is an extraordinary amount of community interest in what's happening with this project, and I think that shouldn't come as any surprise. We have a highly active community, and some people, in fact, have remarked in social media, I didn't realise I lived in Croxton West. But it's nice to know that that's where I live, because in their mind they live in Northcote, or they live in Thornbury, or they live in that pocket of Darebin that, in fact, where a lot of their commuting actually is not necessarily into other parts of Darebin, but is across to East Brunswick. So for a lot of families in that particular pocket, their children are zoned for East Brunswick Primary School. They do some of their shopping on the Moreland side. They are at Ceres on a regular basis. So their interaction with the geography of Darebin is different to people that maybe live in more central parts of Darebin. And as a result, this conversation is important, because it's actually about mobility, and it's actually about movability through not only their own neighbourhood, but also the movements that happen through their neighbourhood. And Councillor Lasserf made point to the fact that there are some elements to this design that is going out to, obviously, into the next stage, that some people may be in favour of and may welcome with open arms, and some people may find challenging. And I think we've got to have an open mind in this chamber about the type of feedback we get. It's not until you go through this consultation process and then put something out that you actually get that sense of those people that hadn't engaged in the first process but suddenly go, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose something here. So I think it's really important that we, as councillors, just like any consultation around one of these broadly traffic management pieces of work, but largely around behaviour change as well, understand that there's going to potentially be a range of views, or in fact we may be surprised and everyone may come in behind it. But I think we need to be open to the feedback. We need to continue working with the community, and I really look forward to seeing what the responses are with this draft.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. I'd just like to note before the Transport team leave us, a particular congratulations to Shay and Alan, who won an award recently for Octopus Schools. Really, yes. And Jen, thank you. Leaders in your field, and we're very proud to have you working for our community. Thank you. Councillors, we'll move now to item 8.12, the planning scheme amendment for Shower Street. Is there a move for that? Councillor Amir, and a seconder? Councillor Messina, thank you. Once again, I'll offer an opportunity for anyone who has questions to ask those questions before we begin debate. Yes, Councillor Amir.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. I was just wondering if we could get some information from the officers about the community response to the recommendations and amendments.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Over to the team.
Thank you, through the Chair. There were 4 submissions received during the exhibition period, and they related mostly to neighbourhood character concerns and whether the design controls proposed went far enough to protect the character of the existing street, given the existing residential growth zoning of that area and the DDO that applies to the broader site. There was one speaker who presented at panel, and the panel considered their main points, and the recommendations of the panel were in line with Council's recommendation, with no particular change to that aspect.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any further questions? No? So, Councillor Amir, over to you.
So what we have here tonight is almost the final step in a long process. So Shower Street, for anyone who doesn't know, is in southwest corner of Preston. It is an area that is unusual in that it's a small area with mostly semi-detached houses, detached individual houses, but surrounded by industrial and higher development areas. And the residents in that area felt that the original zoning and planning for that street wasn't a good fit. So I wanted to, firstly thank the residents for the hard work that's been happening, they've been doing over the last, I think, 3-4 years to get us to this point, and of course to the staff at council who've also been working very hard to provide a really targeted, nuanced response. So thank you to the team who've been working on this, and also including Darebin staff who previously working on it, including Joanna, who did a lot of work in the last year and the year before. So it's really great to hear that the panel recommendation is consistent with the view of council, and here we have a proposal to adopt the amendment for the Darebin planning scheme. I noticed reading the report that in all cases we've accepted the recommendations of the panel, and the amendments amendments have been made to the wording. I recognise that for some residents in that area, they may feel that this doesn't go far enough, and I do acknowledge that there will still be development in Shower Street. It is a challenging situation for, I think, a lot of areas of Darebin, but particularly this street being in the region it is, so close to Preston Junction, so close to St George's Road and the Oakover precinct. And I hope that the work that the staff have done, so much work in the last few years, and to get to this outcome does go some way to protect the character of the street and the makeup that is so much loved by the residents there.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Messina.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I just want to say that Councillor Amir summed it up pretty well, and the journey that's been undertaken by the residents and the officers, and thank you to fellow Officer Joanna, who's no longer here. But the evolution and I know the anxiety and the stress that were placed during that particular process was quite extensive, and we did have a few meetings with the residents to discuss the complexities of that particular area. So I want to thank them for their patience and their journey along the way, and in the belief that we would get there in the end. So I know the stress factors were phenomenal. So that's simply, I think Councillor Amir summed it up pretty well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Councillors, that brings us to item 8.13. Before we get there, I believe that the CEO, had you declared an interest in this? Or no, sorry, next one. Apologies. Very interested in this. Councillor Lassurf. So Councillor Lassurf has circulated an alternate motion, which she would like to move. Just give people a second to have a look at that because it's quite long. When people have had a look, I'll ask if there is a seconder. Seconded by Councillor McCarthy. And before we begin debate, I'll just ask if any councillors have any questions. No. Okay. Councillor Lassurf.
Okay. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I think I can safely say that I'm the councillor most excited about this motion or about this topic. But what we have before us tonight is a draft local law that we'll be putting out for consultation to our community. It follows a motion from last year that called for us to review this local law, and I think it's a really important local. I think it's a really important local law because it tells the rules about how we operate as a council, particularly in this chamber. It does some other things as well, and I think. If we don't get these rules right, then meetings can go horribly wrong or can go a little bit pear-shaped. And so we want to make sure that we have smooth rules that are governing how we do business. I think the other values for me that are really important are around transparency and accountability. And I think that we've really, there's some amendments that I've made that I'm putting forward tonight that I think strengthens that. But for me, the other values are also around fairness and respect. And I really hope that the changes that are being proposed are welcomed by the community, but I also welcome feedback from them on other changes that could be made as well. But I do hope that these changes make the business of council function in a transparent and accountable way. Some of the proposed changes, and I do have, I mean, my motion is very long, but to make some minor changes, sometimes you need to amend multiple clauses, so it does look daunting. But I guess just to summarise some of the changes that have been proposed, not only by myself, but in the officer's report, I know that question and submission time has been a frustrating thing for some residents to participate in, and so hopefully the clarifications and the changes we've made around question time will help. One of the other changes is recording how all councillors vote in the minutes rather than by request. There are some councils that currently do this, and I think in terms of transparency, it's better to record all votes rather than just some. We've made significant reforms to the way notices of motion, the process around it and what needs to be included in it, and I think that will help in terms of the debate that we have in this chamber around getting additional background information, but then also so we're not debating the same notices of motion over many meetings. Other changes include keeping the debate relevant, respectful and on track. We've put a time limit for meetings so that we can't go longer than 5 hours. And there's also been significant changes around the procedures for the election of the mayor. Our current local law is quite silent on the
10
process
seconds.
for this, and I think it is really helpful that that's clarified through this. This will now go out for public consultation, so I encourage people to pick up the copy
That's
of the
time.
draft and have a flick through it.
Thank you, Councillor Surf. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't try to touch on all the points that Councillor Surf has raised. She's done an extraordinary amount of work, as councillors would see. Also, an extraordinary amount of work by our officers to get us to this stage. And you can't deny the passion for governance local laws that Councillor Surf has with her razor-sharp understanding of not only the governance local law but also meeting procedures and the rules that we follow. And those rules are in place for a good reason, because they're about ensuring that the tenor of debate is respectful, it is efficient, it is productive, and it is in keeping with community values. And we need to also acknowledge that whilst we might like to stand up here in this chamber and talk about things and make all sorts of points and put forward our opinions, there's also a whole lot of other people here who aren't in that position, who need to either tolerate us doing that because they work here in the organisation, or come here to pay attention to particular items and deserve to be treated with the respect and the best use of their time. So Councillor Surf and also the officers' proposed changes, I think, go a great way to actually creating the procedural environment to ensure that happens. I just wanted to touch on the fact, and Councillor Surf did also touch on this, that council does not make its own laws without some sort of statutory process, and in this case we do need to put these on exhibition, we do need to invite submissions, and we do need to hold a hearing of submissions committee and consider all submissions to the governance local law and consider whether any changes should be made as part of this process, and that is in keeping with the provisions of the Act that we govern by. So I just would note that as per the current schedule,
10 seconds.
Council will be holding a hearing of submissions committee meeting in March. And so we look forward to seeing what the community has to say and we look forward to responding in due course.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We'll get to item 8.14, establishment and membership of standing committees. The CEO has a statement to make.
Mayor Rennie, I have an interest in this item, so on that basis I'll leave the chamber.
Thank you. I'll invite Ms Bishop to come up and sit in the space you would normally be. Councillor Newton has a motion to propose. I'll get you to read out the motion that you would like to propose.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So there's a couple of things to fill in this one. So for the Audit Committee, there's the Mayor Rennie, Councillor Kim Surf. For the Audit Committee, there's the CEO Employment Matters, where I'd like to nominate Mayor Rennie, Councillor Messina, Councillor Amir and Councillor Williams. And for the Bundoora Homestead, I'd like to nominate myself, Councillor Newton, Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Greco as the ward councillors.
Thank you. We'll just try and make sure that's up on the screen so that everyone knows what we're debating. That was Councillor Newton, Councillor Greco and Councillor Lawrence for the final three. Now, we won't worry too much about the lines. They can come out in due course, but that's the motion in front of us that's been moved by Councillor Newton. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor McCarthy. I'll just check whether there was... I'll start with questions first. So are there any questions? And then Councillor Williams, I'll come to you. No, there are no questions for officers. Councillor Williams,
Is it possible to make an amendment to remove my name in replacing for Tim Lawrence?
So what I would ordinarily do is hear from the mover and the seconder first. So Councillor Williams, I'll hear from the mover and the seconder, and then I'll come straight back to you for that amendment. So Councillor Newton.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Rennie. So this is a process that we do once a year, which is to establish the membership of standing committees. So the planning committee is one that all of us sit on. Hearing of submissions is something that comes up fairly regularly for things like budget items that the community wants to speak to. The audit committee, which is a mayor and one councillor, so I believe that's the mayor and then Councillor Lesurf. The CEO Employment Matters Committee is about the performance of the CEO. So for that, we've got the Mayor will always sit on it, and we've got Councillor Messina, Councillor Meir and Councillor Williams. So I believe that will be 2 new people on that committee and one who's already on it. And for Bundoora Homestead Board of Management, it is in the report that that committee might be changing the way it operates next year, but we don't know that yet. So until that time, we're appointing 3 councillors to the committee. And because it sits in Latrobe Ward, we're putting forward the 3 ward councillors, which include myself.
Thank you, Councillor Newton.
That doesn't answer my question. I'd like to replace my name for the CEO Employment Matters.
So thank you, Councillor Williams. I've understood what you want to do. What I'm doing is moving to the mover first and then the seconder. This is the motion that's being debated. We will then hear your amendment once I've heard from the seconder. So we'll certainly get there, but I'll hear from the seconder first and then I'll come straight back to you to move an amendment. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. Councillor Newton's covered it. I just would note I'll be coming off the CEO Employment Matters Committee, not because I haven't enjoyed it. It's been a fantastic experience to be involved, but it's one of the most important committees that we have. I would note that as a matter of practice, I think it's important that we maintain a balance of councillors that are new to that process, but also councillors who've been involved in that process, and that's because the business of that committee is actually an ongoing performance process, which is imperative that council undertakes that process with the mixture of, in this case, making sure we have the experience and involvement in the previous year's process, and also the opportunity for more councillors to step into that. So on that basis, I'm happy to step off that, given that as listed currently, we have 2 councillors who have been involved in the process, this year being Councillor Williams and Councillor Rennie.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Williams, you have an amendment to propose.
As I stipulated that to remove myself off the CEO Employment Matters, I've been on it for the last 3 years, and I know that Councillor Tim Lawrence would like to go on it.
We don't need to debate. All I need is the amendment. So the amendment would be to remove Councillor Williams and replace Williams with Lawrence.
Sorry.
That's okay. So the first thing I'll do is check whether that's acceptable to the mover and the seconder.
No.
No. So Councillor Williams, in order to put forth that amendment, you will need a seconder. Is there a seconder for Councillor Williams's amendment?
For the purpose of the debate, I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. So Councillor Williams will now debate that amendment. Over to you.
Thank you. I've been on this CEO Employment Matters for 3 years now, and I think it's only fair that it's time that if another councillor been the last year going who hasn't been on the committee or hasn't had a choice on what committees that Councillor Lawrence has been able to want to be on, that I'm more than happy to swap over for him to be on that committee. Also, in the last few times when they've tried to schedule meeting times, that I've been unable to attend at a certain time, and I think it's more important that the committees are able to reach and come to the right timing where everybody can meet at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Messina, would you like to speak as a seconder?
No.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Just very briefly, I'd like to speak in opposition to the amendment, and it's really continuing on what Councillor McCarthy talked about, which is that this is one of the most important committees that we have. So I believe that it's very important to have people that are experienced on the committee as well as new members. So, you know, we have experience and we have people that would like to be on it for the first time. So I believe that with Mayor Rennie and Councillor Williams, we would achieve that experience as well as having two new councillors on the committee with Councillor Messina and Councillor Amir.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? No, so we'll now vote on the amendment. All those in favour? And against? That amendment is lost. Yes, Councillor Williams?
I have another amendment.
Certainly.
I'd like to amend my name off the CEO Employment Matters to put in Councillor Greco, who is existing on the committee he's already on the CEO Employment Matters Committee, and as I said, I'm more than happy to
That's okay. So
replace my name with Councillor Greco.
We won't debate it yet. We'll get to the debate. So we'll just note that Councillor Williams has moved amendment, which would be to replace Councillor Williams in the CEO Employment Matters with Councillor Greco. If we could just hang on. Well, I'll just ask, is that acceptable to the mover and the seconder?
No.
No. Is there a seconder for that?
I have a question.
Yes, Councillor Messina.
Mayor Rennie, I'd like to understand the process. If the councillor isn't here, and are they able to, should they accept the nomination? I have a question regarding that.
I don't
Doesn't
believe...
the count, no?
I don't believe that's necessary, but I'll hand over to Mr Mann.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, it would be appropriate if the council was, if we knew their willingness to accept the motion, but perhaps Councillor Williams is aware of that. I'm not sure.
Those councillors have indicated willingness, so I think we can say that they have indicated via email at various times over the last couple of months. I can confirm that those emails, I think, have gone to everyone. So I'll come back to the question. Is there a seconder for Councillor Williams's amendment? No, there is no seconder for that amendment, so that lapses for want of a seconder. Thank you. So we'll return to the debate. We've had the mover and the seconder have spoken. Are there any further speakers to this motion? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against?
Can my name please be put down as against?
Certainly, Councillor Williams. So we'll record that Councillor Williams voted in opposition to that motion. Thank you. Now, before we move on to the next item, which is 8.15, we'll just get the CEO back in the room. So, councillors, we're now at 8.15, contract award for Bundoora Homestead Play Space. I've got a mover in Councillor Newton. Is there a seconder for that? Actually, we'll just, seconded by Councillor Surf, but we'll just make sure that we're getting the right names in. Yep, so Councillor Newton, if you could read that out, that would be great.
Okay, so we'd like to award contract number CT 2018116 for the Bundoora Homestead Place Space construction to Citywide PT Limited for the contract sum of $649,258, including of provisional items and GST. Approves the contingency amount of $64,000, GST inclusive being approximately 10% of the contract amount to be used if required for variations and other foreseen items as part of contract number CT 2018-116, authorises the Chief Executive Officer to finalise and execute the contract documentation on behalf of the Council, and confirms that the Council report and resolution remain confidential with the exception of the successful tenderer's name.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. And I had a seconder in Councillor Surf. Before we begin debate, are there any questions for the officers in this matter? No? So we'll move to debate. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I'm very pleased to support this and see this happening. So this is something where the Bundoora Homestead Arts Centre has just really gone from strength to strength over the last few years. And I think it's worth noting that this is probably one of the most colonial buildings that we have in Darebin. And it's one that some members of our Aboriginal community haven't always felt welcome or because it's such an imposing building. So something that I really love about the fact that we're awarding this contract that will include working with an Indigenous artist, Stephen Payton, it just really, really continues to do what the Bundoora Homestead Arts Centre does so well, which is actually to have this kind of amazing juxtaposition of a colonial building we have a lot of Aboriginal artwork that's exhibited. The person who won the Darebin Art Prize this year was an Aboriginal woman. So it's one of these things where the more that I see of the Arts Centre just really thriving, the more things like this are just, I think they're so important. It's also one of these things that we talk a lot about on the board, about how much the Arts Centre fits in with the wider community. And I think the great thing about having a play space like this is it's something that will draw more members of the Bundoora community to the Arts Centre. And I'm sure when they're there, hopefully they'll come in, get a coffee, see the artwork, and the Bundoora Homestead Arts Centre will continue to thrive.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Lasserf. Nothing to add. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Thank you. That brings us to 8.16, Flinders Street Thornbury Rehabilitation Tender Award. That's moved by Councillor Lasserf. We'll just make sure we've got the details.
So the motion is that Council awards contract 20191114 for the Flinders Street Thornbury Road Rehabilitation to Petrolo Constructions Pty Ltd for the contract sum of $660,034.13 GST inclusive. Approves a contingency amount of $66,000 GST inclusive. And those are all the blanks, so I won't read it all out.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lasserf.
This contract is to fix up, for want of a better word, fix up the road, Flinders Street, between Station Street and Matisse Street. So it's a street that is largely unmade or is in quietly poor condition, and is actually I don't know if anyone's driven down it, but quite a bumpy ride. Because of, I guess, the nature of the street with the houses on the back backing onto it, so there isn't really any house frontages, particularly along the eastern parts of the street, and High School to the northern edge. It is actually a street that attracts lots of illegal dumping and people doing things that they probably shouldn't be. So I'm really pleased to see this project get up and to be investing the money in making that road. We, particularly the Rucker Ward councillors, have had lots of conversations with the residents around that area because they have identified it as a problem, but also an opportunity in terms of, I guess, creating a new space for them to use. And I know that this is just to build a road, but I do hope in the future that we can invest more money in making the street, I guess, more accessible, more livable for the families that adjoin the street, but also for the high school kids that use it each and every day as well. This motion in particular is to award a contract, and the usual processes have been followed, as has been outlined in the report. As we like to always see, particularly with the making of roads, there will be recycling content used to make that road, which is good for the climate emergency and good for our waste crisis as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm really pleased that we're finally doing this project, and I just note that a former mayor of Darebin and a former Ruckerwood councillor who once lived in this street used to quote that she lived on the only street that had never been reconstructed, and was in some parts proud but also saddened by that, because it was one of those streets that continually seemed to miss out, and there'd been a number of attempts to get it over the line. This is getting over the line tonight, and it's an exciting project because it is not just obviously a road rehabilitation project, as Councillor Lassurf has alluded to, but includes a whole range of other items. And I just draw to Councillor's attention on page 120 what else is going to happen as part of this. So we will see the recycling of the existing surface and road materials. So that'll be part of the project. It's really closing the loop on the waste component. We're going to be using our new recycled tyre asphalt as part of the road resurfacing, which is fantastic, a great demonstration of that project. We'll also be upgrading roads, footpaths, drainage infrastructure, and installing 4 rain gardens in this street, which I think is the highest number of rain gardens in any local street in all of Darebin. So there's a new thing. 26 new trees will be planted. We'll be upgrading streetlights to energy-efficient LEDs. Water savings will be achieved through recycled water during tree establishment. But of course, this is also one of the first projects that actually falls under our new social procurement framework, which we adopted just this evening. And I think it's worth noting the items that have actually, as a result of adopting that only about an hour ago, it's already had an impact, which is great to see. Obviously, the upgrade to the road resurface is going to bring this road into a DDA compliance, which is fantastic. Because this is one of the few roads that actually gets you all the way down to the Darebin Parklands with that easy pedestrian link and cycling link. There'll also be upgrading of the lights to improve safety, and of course, a lot of community involvement in the design process. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 8.17, submission to the draft Melbourne Industrial and Commercial Land Use Plan. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Messina, and seconded by Councillor Amir. Before we begin debate, are there any questions of the officers? No, it's like... yes.
Just one. If I can just ask through our officers what our latest intel is in relation to submissions and involvement from some of our neighbouring councils in relation to this process, and what we know, what they're advocating, particularly the City of Banyule, given the industrial precinct that specifically is referred to in our submission. If we're, I suppose, to clarify the question, if we're aware of what they're advocating for in that case.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, we do know that a number of our neighbouring councils have been presented the plan and are considering submissions, but we don't know the exact nature of those. The suggestion is, I think, that they're broadly in favour of the plan, but like us, looking at some of the more granular responses, I think.
Thank you for that. Are there further questions? No. Councillor Messina.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie. On the 1st of November, DELP released the draft industrial and commercial land use policy. Whilst Plan Melbourne addresses how Melbourne's growth will be managed over the next 3 years, this report focuses on current and future needs for industrial and commercial land across Metro Melbourne. DELP's new draft industrial and commercial land use proposes that large tracts of land are kept for industrial use across metropolitan Melbourne. Melbourne's population is expected to increase by 6.3 million by the 2031, and I actually read on the weekend that in the Sydney Morning Herald that Melbourne is the driving national economic growth on the back of the finance and construction and health services, which forecasts it will be challenging Sydney as Australia's leading Australia's economy is most important. NERP is one of the areas that is quite under the microscope into this particular area, and it is one of the areas that are considered kept largely industrial. It is probably something that we've been focusing on this particular council and the previous term for a number of years. And this plan as an act, it will mean that it's very difficult to deliver the NERP, unfortunately, as a new suburb, which is all mixed use as per our council plan. It is great that the state government is thinking about industry and making sure there's enough land in future to support it. In particular, things like boutique manufacturing, creative industries, local market makers could potentially flourish at NERP. However, we think that we need to also consider local context more closely, and also that allows part of NERP to be rezoned for mixed use, including... Hello. Okay, well, I don't know what happened. With this, it's one of those things tonight. We think it's particularly important around the activity centre near Northland. We hope that our submission and conversations with DELP as part of this process will be positive and allow contents to be probably considered. I also note when I look through the microscope, we look at the projected 22,000 more jobs under this strategy, with key industrial areas in terms of healthcare, education, accommodation and professional technical services. And that's 22,000 more jobs in the area of Darebin, which is also positive. So I'm happy to see what submissions or what comes through the process.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Can I just check who my seconder was? Thank you, Councillor Amir.
The plan has been released following on from Plan Melbourne. I try to avoid saying DELP because it just sounds like I'm trying to swallow something difficult, which we are, because I'm really upset about this. While there's some good things in here, particularly, there's a lot we support around the La Trobe University precinct and the links to biomedical research. Of course, we know there's lots of employment in Northland, and absolutely want to support a lot of the education sector in Darebin, and acknowledging the West Preston Industrial Precinct. So much work has been done around strategic planning around the development of the Northland Urban Renewal Precinct. And the vision that we had was, I think, shared by myself, other councillors, by the community. We had a vision for a mixed-use space that could do a whole lot of things that is not currently possible anywhere in Darebin. So including vision for new public transport infrastructure, linking in East Preston, which is currently a dead zone in terms of trams and trains. There's a whole lot of things that can only be done with design if we're starting from scratch. One thing that comes to mind for me is around community solar. We could have had a community that's off the grid. We could have a whole lot more trees, and it's really disappointing to see these barriers being put up. We also need a whole lot more housing in Darebin, and this was such a good opportunity to have housing that's affordable, right with new jobs in emerging sectors, in progressive sectors. To me, locking it in really seems like a backward step. And there's so much strategic work for these 100,000 jobs and 10,000 jobs and 20,000 homes, and I don't want that vision to be lost with this broad sweep of a planning brush.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
I was actually just going to propose a point 3, if I may. It may be implicit in the report, but I couldn't see it, which is that, so it would be that council, and then point 3, provide its submission to neighbouring councils, particularly City of Banyule.
So that's an amendment.
Provide its submission, so that council provide its submission to neighbouring councils, particularly City of Banyule.
We could just...
neighbouring councils. Yep.
Okay, so that's been accepted by the mover and the seconder. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. Look, I'm pleased that Councillor Messina and Councillor Amir outlined the key issues, and I'm also pretty concerned about what's being proposed by this. I think that the deadline for submissions of the 31st of December really concerns me in terms of the planning process that's underway here. I think there is obviously a point being made here, which is that there is a real need to retain some industrial and commercial land, particularly in the what we describe as the NERP area, because of some of the activity, because of the need for those employment precincts. But there's also the need for a strategic approach to all of that land, and to have a deadline of the 31st of December this year with such a short time frame that we're not even sure what the status of our neighbouring councils are in relation to this. The NERP precinct, it was not just a thing for Darebin, it was actually a thing for the north, because it's the opportunity to create housing opportunities for people to live in Darebin, but to connect to the transport corridors, both to the west, being into the Darebin corridor, and also into the east, into the city of Banyule. And that's why I think it's really important. This section, this parcel of land, actually sits on the edge of our city, and has a strong interface, obviously at the Bell Street end, with that transport corridor, and of course the opportunities for future investment in public transport have been part of our vision from the start. I would also note, and the report makes this very clear, that the need to respond to this is absolutely critical for council to make its case convincingly, and I think the submission does that, and I thank our officers for their speed with which they've brought this together, because if this proceeds in the way that some of these processes can proceed, this is a change to the Darebin planning scheme, which is not one that we have proposed. It has been one that's been proposed through a parliamentary process. And as a result, that'll be subjected upon our scheme, rather than us putting that forward. So we need to have our voice in there as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Councillors, that brings us to the end of consideration of reports. And we'll now move to consideration of responses to petitions, notices, motions and general business. There are none, so we'll move to item 10, notices of motion. Councillor Newton.
I'd like to move that.
Councillor Newton has moved a notice of motion that's seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I think it's incredibly important for Darebin Council to note as strongly as we can our opposition to parts of the local government bill that was tabled on the 14th of November 29 in State Parliament, and that's in particular the section 14 and 15, which remove the provision for multi-member wards. So this is a council that has had multi-member wards since 2008. It's a council that currently has 6 women and 3 men on it. It's a council that was reviewed this year, where pretty much all of the community members that spoke to that submission or did a written submission said that they're very happy with the multi-member ward system. There was no submissions that said that they wanted single-member wards. So what we have here is the Victorian government trying to push through a bill that includes single-member wards for councils like Darebin that no one in this community wants. I think it's incredibly important to show our opposition to that as strongly as we can. What it also means for us is we have a council election in about 10 months' time. If this bill goes through in February, we won't know where the wards are until sometime after that. This is something where even in the VEC review, they had a recommended option, they had an alternative option. Single-member wards were not presented in either of those options because there was such strong community support for multi-member wards. And this is something where I just feel so strongly that the Victorian government forcing something on this council that no one in the community wants is unacceptable, and I think we need to show that as strongly as we can.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to commend Councillor Newton for taking the initiative and putting together such an evidence-based motion to submit to a range of stakeholders. And I say that because what we have is the evidence base for why this is fundamentally bad policy, in stark contrast to the complete lack of evidence that has been put forward to support the proposed ward reforms that the Minister is championing. Having spoken with the Minister directly at a forum earlier this year, and I asked him the question, how do you deal with the fact that in a city like Darebin, where we are seeing immense change, driven largely by state and federal policy, an additional 40,000 people to live in Darebin over the next decade, the highest concentration of that will be in the Preston area, and you're proposing to move from an electoral structure that accommodates growth and change quite naturally to an electoral structure where a new ward would need to be invented once every 4 years, Or alternatively, the ward boundaries would need to be rewritten every 4 to 6 years just to accommodate the variations. And I said, if you were really concerned about the process of governance, you'd be much better off moving to no wards at all and just having everyone responsible, because the reality is when you are a councillor in a city like Darebin, you are not just responsible for the 2 or 3 kilometres that your single ward covers, but in fact the entire city. Because what happens in Reservoir, even though I represent Northcote, Thornbury, Fairfield and Elphington, what happens in Reservoir is absolutely critical to me and to residents in my ward, just as it goes the same way. So we need to be councillors for the entire city. I would expect that would be the thinking of the Minister. That is certainly what the Local Government Act demands, and yet we have a proposal on the table that will almost certainly see a reduction in the number of women councillors in this city. It's no coincidence we've moved from 43 single-member ward councils just 2 decades ago to just 7, and that has seen a rapid increase in the number of women from 33% to 43%.
Thank you, that's time.
That will go backwards.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. We'll note that Councillor Williams voted in opposition. Thank you. That brings us to item 11, reports of standing committees. We have the Audit Committee report, moved by Councillor Lassurf, seconded by Councillor Messina. Thank you. Are there any questions of the officer before we move to the debate? No? Councillor Lassurf, over to you.
I will just keep my comments brief. This motion before us is simply to note a report from the Audit Committee based on the meetings that we've held over the last year, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Councillor Messina.
Nothing further.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to records of assemblies of councillors, moved by...
I withdraw my moving, so Councillor.
Okay, Councillor Amir.
I'd like to move just with a small amendment for the last item on my report. In the final line, remove the words "and residents."
Hang on, we're on assemblies of councillors, not reports. So I'll go back to Councillor McCarthy for assemblies of councillors as the mover and Councillor Amir as the seconder. All those in favour? Okay. Councillor Amir, number 13, reports by mayors and councillors. I'll take that as you moving it with an amendment. Can we just read out the amendment and make sure that the staff catch that?
For the final item on my report, remove the words "and residents."
Thank you. So that's reports by mayors and councillors. All those in favour? Sorry, I didn't have a seconder. Can I have a seconder for that? Councillor McCarthy. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to consideration of reports considered confidential.
I move that we move into camera.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor McCarthy, seconded by Councillor Lassurf. All those in favour? That motion is carried. I'd like to thank members of the gallery, in particular Mr Norris. We've now arrived at the confidential item on the agenda, so we'll be closing the meeting.